Okay, so our first speaker today is Dan McCarthy. He is the editor of the American Conservative. I'm sure you're all well familiar with this work. I have a copy right here. Cannot recommend this enough. So if you do not currently subscribe to the American Conservative, do not read their stuff, talk to Dan. He'll be glad to help get you signed up. This is absolutely essential reading for those in the liberty movement, and you will find it constantly packed with very good information. So let's get him up right now. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan McCarthy.
Thanks very much, Matt. That's a nice endorsement. I'm here to tell you that all of you, or almost all of you in this room, know a secret. And that secret, of course, is the secret of what makes Ron Paul a success, what makes him such a consistent advocate for liberty and free markets. Most of you have probably heard, at least the word Austrian economics. You're aware that there is a school of thought and a tremendous intellectual tradition out there which teaches the fundamental logic of human action. This tradition goes back to the 19th century, and in the 20th century, some of the most glowing names in the economics field are associated with it. Above all, Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich von Hayek, and of course, Murray Rothbard. Well, today I'm here to introduce, I wish to introduce to you the heir to this wonderful tradition, Mr. Joseph Salerno, Dr. Joseph Salerno, who is a professor of economics at Pace University and is the academic vice president of the Ludwig von Mises Institute. He truly is continuing the great work of Mises and Rothbard in the 21st century and is invaluable to this movement. He is here to tell you about the true workings of the Federal Reserve and central banking.
Thank you very much. I had sort of a lot of pictures, funny pictures to present, but as you can see, it's now an impossibility. So it's only going to be about a 5-minute talk. But I actually will have to read from my cell phone at one point. Sort of a funny executive order passed by FDR. Okay, let me just start with the basics of the Federal Reserve, what it is, what it's not, and then I want to talk about some of the myths that have grown up about it, or around it, and that have been promoted, of course, by the Fed itself. Okay, first thing to point out is that the Fed bills itself as an inflation fighter. Okay, not only is the Fed not an inflation fighter, it's the only organization that is capable of causing inflation because it has a monopoly of the money supply. It has a legal monopoly of creating money. Now, I'm going to use the term printing money, though it actually technically doesn't print money, as Ben Bernanke technically did not lie on 60 Minutes when he said the Fed is not printing money. Okay, but in spirit, it's a big prevarication. He lied. Okay. Okay. Now the Fed can create money really in cyberspace with one keystroke. That's how it actually does create money. I'll go into that. But before we go into that, there's an iron, what I call an iron law of monopoly. Okay. Anyone who has a legal monopoly in any area will use it to achieve their own ends. Okay. Whatever those ends are, they could be selfish, they could be altruistic. Let's say that the saintly Mother Teresa was still alive, and for some reason, she was given the legal right to print money. Okay. She's selfless. She wants to help the poor. Well, she would print a few $100 billion to feed more poor people, possibly build them homes. Okay. Even I, a committed libertarian, were I given the monopoly to print money, I would print billions up to help the Ron Paul campaign. Set up a free market university with myself as president, with a dignified salary, of course. But regardless of the motives of those in charge of the monopoly of money, the effects will always be the same. Rising prices, a redistribution of wealth from those who do not get the money early on and have to pay the higher prices for a while, to those who get the money first, and to the money printers themselves, of course. In the real world, okay, let's get away from fantasy. In the real world, if anyone did what the Fed did, they would be arrested and prosecuted for counterfeiting. Okay. In fact, during World War II, both the British government and the German government tried to steal each other's money printing plates. so that they could print up money, drop it over the country, and destroy the currency. The United States had plans to do this in the Vietnam War. They never came to fruition. That is to reproduce perfectly North Vietnamese currency notes and shower them on the countryside, which is, of course, what Ben Bernanke is doing now, Helicopter Ben. So, something else to keep in mind. Inflation is not the result of monopoly pricing by business. It's not the result of greedy wage demands by unions. It is not the result of OPEC charging outrageous prices and price gouging on oil, or even of piggish consumers going on spending splurges. That's all a smokescreen by the Fed, okay? There is one and only one cause of inflation, and that is the power to expand the money supply. And where does that power lie? Legally with the Fed. So the Fed is not an inflation fighter, it is an inflation creator, always and everywhere. Nor is the Fed really a protector against business downturns, unemployment, recessions, and all the other nonsense, okay? In fact, in the course of printing new money, they distort interest rates. And that creates paper profits, and it creates false capital gains that make people allocate or make investments in wrong areas that later have to be liquidated. It also causes the creation of jobs doing the wrong things. So, recessions are the free market striking back, the invisible hand striking back against government and trying to rearrange resources and workers so that they best serve the demands of consumers. But ultimately, it is caused by inflation. Let's talk about some other myths about the Fed. Now, the Fed claims that it has performed well in preserving the value of our dollar. Okay, if you had a dollar in 1913, it would take you $22.67 to buy the same thing today that could have been bought with $1 then. That means that our dollar is in effect worth 5 cents, okay, based on the 1913 dollar. We went off the gold standard in 1933, so let's take that point. From that point forward, the dollar has lost 94% of its value. It's now worth 6 cents from 1933. And here's what I want to just quickly read something from my cell phone. The executive order taking us off of the gold standard. And all I want to say here is, under the executive order of the President, all persons are required to deliver on or before May 1st, 1933, all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates now owned by them to a Federal Reserve bank, branch, or agency. And then, after a long bunch of bureaucratic speech, it ends with criminal penalties for violation of the executive order, $10,000 fine or 10 years imprisonment, or both. Now, that was not repealed. U.S. citizens could not own gold unless you were a licensed jeweler or dentist until 1976. It was even against the law to own gold outside the country, in Canada, for example. Okay. Since that time, well, if you compare the dollar to that time, as I said, it's worth only 6 cents. We went back to a watered-down gold standard after World War II, from about 1946 to 1971. We have what's called the Bretton Woods system, in which a dollar was convertible into gold, though not for you or I or our parents or grandparents, but for foreign central banks and foreign governments. Because the U.S. government then had the right to inflate, because the dollar now is the only currency convertible into gold, foreign governments would then accept those dollars as if they were gold. So there was no reason for us not to continue to run deficits and finance them by monetizing the debt. And that's what we did during the 60s, to pay for the war on poverty and the war in Vietnam, both of which were monstrous wars. Well, what happened? Of course you know what happened. Prices rose tremendously in the U.S. compared to Europe, so that the Germans, the French, and other countries demanded that their dollars that they were accumulating in their central banks be redeemed in gold. We blackmailed the Germans into withdrawing their demands by claiming that, well, you know, we might have to remove our nuclear umbrella, protect you against the Russians if you don't withdraw your demands. The French, on the other hand, thumbed their noses. They dropped out of NATO. They started their own nuclear force. Okay? However, even the U.S. with all its power couldn't prevent the run on gold. So that in 1971, in the last 2 weeks before Nixon closed the gold window, we would have run out of gold in 2 weeks. Okay, we had gone from $25 billion worth of gold in the 1950s down to $9 billion. Since that time, the prices have increased by about 5 times. Okay, a dollar today is worth only 19 cents of what it was in 1971. Okay. Finally, let's take the high tide of central banking. Now, Bernanke, in a speech in 2004, claimed that central banks had solved the problem of inflation and recession, and he called it the Great Moderation. And this took place allegedly between 1984 and 2005. So let's give him that period of time. The dollar lost half its value during that time. And this is after the central bank supposedly had finally figured out how to run things, okay, in the beginning of 1984. So the dollar was worth 48 cents in 2005 compared to its 1984 value. This is hardly a good job. I need not emphasize that. In fact, if you look at 1914, we had $11 billion in the money supply, in checking accounts and currency. That has grown from 11 billion until today we have $10 trillion in the money supply. Okay? The money supply has increased 900 times. Okay? In percentage terms, that's about 90,000%. How did it increase? The Fed increased it simply by using the word printing money, but really just creating money out of thin air and by simply buying bonds, and we'll get to that.